gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I return, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him, and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside, into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the word of the Lord. Thank you. You may be seated. Will you pray with me? Today I want to preach on the topic, when you are afraid. Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, God of the whole universe, we thank you for this time that we have together to worship you and to listen to your word for us. Lord, we ask that you will cleanse our hearts from all of the things that keep us from listening to what you have for us today. Lord, we confess our sins to you, and we receive your forgiveness. And we thank you, God, for what you have for us. And we pray that Spirit of God, that you will speak into the depth of our being, and that we will receive and respond to your word, because your word has the power to change us. And today we want to be changed. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. So my name is Mary Yu. I was born and raised in Saigon, or now known as Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Have any of you been to Vietnam before? No? Okay, that's alright. Maybe it could be on your bucket list. Let's see if I can sell it to you. Vietnam is a home of over 90 million people. And our main transportation is motorcycle. It is also my favorite mode of transportation. And I would never forget how I learned how to ride a motorcycle. It's from my mom. And if you ask me what I miss most about my home country, besides the people, my family, my friends who are there, I would still say to you my motorcycle. Because it's the one that gives me all of the adventures around my hometown. So I remember one night when I was doing homework as a 10th grader, around 16 years old, my mom came to my room and said, hey, tomorrow I will teach you how to ride a motorcycle. So I turned to my mom, really excited, saying, really, Mom? When are we going to do it? And so my mom answered, in the morning, you will ride us to school. And now I'm like, oh no, you're kidding me. I don't know how to ride a motorcycle yet. How can I ride us to school tomorrow? And in case you forget, there's a lot of traffic in the morning. It's called rush hour, Mom. And my mom smiled and said, well, that's how you will learn. So the next morning came, my mom gave me the key of her motorcycle. And I was so afraid. I thought to myself, this is not a good idea. I think my mom is losing her mind or something, I don't know. But to my surprise, my mom confidently showed me the gears, the brake, and how to start a motorcycle. And after like a 5-minute introduction of how to start a motorcycle, my mom said, okay, here, you're gonna do it. And she just hopped onto the backseat of the motorcycle and just waited for me to start it. And she said, don't worry, I'll ride behind you. And if you fall, I will catch you. And you know, somehow those words of my mom, if you fall, I will catch you, just gave me the confidence that I needed to take the risk that day, to learn how to ride a motorcycle. And that risk has granted me one of the greatest joys of exploring new places, of meeting amazing people, of eating fabulous food that I would never had a chance if I don't know how to ride a motorcycle on my own and do my own adventures. And reflecting back on my record of that risk-taking in my life, I see that in certain situations, I am more open to take a risk than in other situations. I don't know about you, but if I have a sense that if I fall, I will be okay. Or like my mom told me, if I fall, she will catch me. That gives me more confidence to take a risk when I'm afraid. So today I have a question for us all. I know this may be not your normal habit, but my question to you, you're going to have to share your answer to your neighbor. So think about it, okay? Okay, the question is, what usually holds you back from taking a risk in your life? I know you may not be used to this, but would you turn to your neighbor and quickly share one thing that often holds you back from taking a risk? And I will give you a couple seconds to do so.
I guess I'm thinking too much.
Really cautious.
Trying
to be certain first before you take it. That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. Hey. Oh, sorry. Please continue. You ready?
Ready. I know about it.
Yeah? Did you share?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. That's the risk that you just took right there. So I grew up in a Vietnamese church where congregational response during the sermon is really common. So like you will hear like elders like shout amen, like during the sermon, and the young people will like nod their heads or like making noises if they're excited or if they disagree with the preacher. So I want to invite you to do something like that. So if I ask you questions, please feel free to respond by shouting out your answer or by nodding your head or making noises, however you're able. Can we do that? Okay, thank you. So in the parable we read today, Jesus and his disciples were in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was the worship center of the Jewish people, just like Hollywood is the center of the US film industry today, right? And so most Jewish scholars, legal experts, and rabbis of high reputation live in Jerusalem, just like famous actors and actresses and film directors live in Los Angeles of Southern California. But Jesus and his disciples are not from Jerusalem. They were from Galilee, which makes them Jerusalem northern neighbors. So Jerusalem is here, Galilee is here. And you see, people in Jerusalem despise their neighbors from Galilee because they say that those people have strong accents and lack of Jewish sophistication. So how many of you have ever been to Texas before? Yes? Oh, great, awesome. Where in Texas?
It's like 3 hours.
Okay. Nice. Okay, so Texas was my first introduction to the US. That was the community that I was in for 4 years of college. And I love them. I appreciate their hospitality to me so much. So I'm not making fun of Texans. But if you're in Texas, you will see their normal outfits are worn-out jeans and cowboy boots, right? And a shiny buckle right on their belts, right there, with like a big cowboy hat. And that's how they roll, right? They will say "y'all," and that's how they roll. Like that's how Texans roll. But can you imagine a Texan with worn-out jeans, with cowboy boots, with a shiny buckle on their belt, and a big cowboy hat, walking around Los Angeles? Yeah. What would that look like to the people in LA? it would just look really out of place, wouldn't it? Because Texan culture and Los Angeles culture are very different cultures. And it's just like Jerusalem culture and Galilean culture are starkly different from each other. And so Jesus and his disciples stood out as foreigners to their own people in Jerusalem. Their country accents, their outfits, good morning, good morning. Jesus and his disciples' accent and outfits, darker skin color because of their farming or their fishing work, set them apart from their own Jewish community in Jerusalem. How many of you believe that our living context really shaped the way we see our world? Right? Like I said, I was born and raised in Vietnam, and if you know Ho Chi Minh City is a nightlife city. So the restaurants and the shops will close earliest at 11 p.m. And when I first came here to Texas, my school was in a city that is 30 minutes from Dallas, which is a metropolitan in Texas, right? And one day I was just eating ice cream with my friends, and the manager came to us and said, "Could you please leave because it's 9 o'clock, we're closing." And I'm like, "What? 9 o'clock and you're closing?" It was so different for me. And at that point, I just realized my world has dramatically changed. And because of my context, I think that 9 o'clock closing is too early, right? But and it's the same with Jesus and his disciples at the time, who come from a community, a fish village or farming. They see the world very differently from a community in a big city like Jerusalem. And I could imagine how the Jewish people in Jerusalem talked about Jesus as not one of us. Jesus' country accent clearly marked him as other and less than in the dominant culture of Jerusalem. And against this background of being seen as other and inferior, Jesus went into the Jerusalem temple. And you remember what he did there? He disrupted the temple, right? But he disrupted the profitable business of the temple people, exploiting God's children with high prices for their temple sacrifices. Against this background of being seen as suspicious and threatening to the current political, social, religious order, Jesus called out the Jewish authorities in Jerusalem for their hypocrisy. And against this background, that Jesus told his disciples this parable that we just read today about the kingdom of heaven. So my brothers and sisters, this was the context in which the disciples of Jesus listened to this parable. It was in the midst of high tension between Jesus' way of life and the Greco-Roman Jewish culture way of life that this parable was told. So would you listen to this story once again with me in this context in your mind? The kingdom of heaven is like a wealthy man sharing his possessions with his 3 servants before he left for a trip. He gave each one an amount of money according to their abilities. And as we read, the first one received 5 bags of gold, or another translation saying 5 talents. And the second servant received 2, and the third servant received 1 bag of gold or 1 talent. And I know bag of gold, a talent is not our currency today. Our currency is dollars. So let me try to do some, let me think of the way to just translate talent or bag of gold into our currency today. You see, 1 talent or 1 bag of gold at the time is equivalent to what a worker hopes to gain for 20 years of his labor or her labor. And so that's not a small gift, right? It's can you imagine receiving a gift that is worth 20 years of your daily wages as a worker? That's huge. So this is a treasure to a servant who received this gift from his master. So what kind of master is it that gives such generous amounts of money to his servants to steward? What do you think? Is it a stingy master? Would you give that much amount of money to your servant? Talk to me, please. What kind of such generous amounts of money to his servants to steward? What do you think? Just make some guesses.
He's trusting. He's trusting the servant, so he's very generous.
Generous, yeah. He's extravagantly generous. He's not a stingy master that we usually think about our boss or like, you know, people that are above us in the authority. He has a great deal of trust in his servants that he hands over to them as well. The parable tells us that he gives each servant according to his or her ability. The master knows his servant. It means that he knows that this servant is capable of and what he's not capable of in handling this amount of money. He knows, like, you know, like he has a record in the past of like what his servants could do. He does not throw such a huge amount of money at them just because he can, or because he wants to show off to his neighbors that he's rich and he can just bless his servants that way. He deliberately shares his wealth, his fortune with them, and expects them to make a good use of it. Do you prefer working for a boss like that trusts you generously, instead of a boss that micromanages you because he doesn't trust you and still trying to see what you can do and what you cannot do? Yeah? So my brothers and sisters, the kingdom of heaven is like this master who extends generous trust to his servants. You see, these three servants I consider worthy of their master's trust. No matter how they think of themselves, no matter what other people think of them, in their master's eyes, these servants are worthy of his risk, his possessions for. He takes a tremendous risk to trust his servants with his fortune. He risks losing some or all of the money because the servants could lose them, right? Or he even risks losing his servants because, can you imagine, like, you know, if you receive a huge amount of money, you can just run away from the house and just be, you know, on your own. And if you are familiar with business, like training a new worker is costly to a company or to an organization. So this is not small risks that the master is taking. Have you ever drawn pros and cons columns to help you make a decision before? Like, for example, no. Austin say no, I don't know about Ethan. No, never done that. I don't know, Mr. Leo. Have you ever done that? And for example, you're trying to choose something, like choose a university, for example, or choose a workplace, you know, that you want to enroll or you want to go to after being accepted by so many. So in your discernment process, you evaluate pros and cons of each option, right? For this university, you see the pros that you're going to receive the best performing arts education in the country, and you're going to have snow and learn how to ski. But the cons is you're going to be so far away from your family and your friends, and you're not going to have homemade, delicious Indonesian food from your mama anymore. And so then you have to weigh those pros and cons and see which ones are worth more, right? Snow or mommy's food? And I just imagine after the master draw like pros and cons columns, he sees that the servants are worth his risk. You see, for the disciples of Jesus who were living under a regime that sees them as less than, as threatening, as not trustworthy, because of their education background, because of their family of origin, because of their skin color, of their accent, of their caste, they must be shocked by this image of the kingdom of heaven. In a context where the empire and the religious institution constantly try to profit from people and put more burdens on their shoulders, this image of the kingdom of heaven that generously shares and extends trust to people is good news. In a context where the education system often puts profits over students and faculty and keep raising their tuition fee, this image of the kingdom of heaven that sees people as worthy of the cost is good news. In a context where corporations or bosses often exploit workers of their labor and sees them as machines, this image of the kingdom of heaven that sees people as humans and treat them with dignity is good news. In a context where people of color or immigrants like us are often dehumanized and seen as other, where refugees from certain countries are being banned from entering into this country to receive help. This image of the kingdom of heaven that believes in the dignity of human beings and see them worth the risk is good news. So I have another question for you. What aspects in your life do you need to hear this good news that you are worth the risk? Okay. Again, I will invite you to turn to your neighbor and just share quickly one thing, one aspect in your life that you need to hear this good news that you are worth the risk. Okay, I give you a minute to do so. Please. Mr. Leo and what's your name? Charlene. Thank you for coming. Mr. Leo, come to Charlene to share one thing, one aspect in your life. You need to hear this good news that you are worth the risk.
Aspect of my life is what?
What is the question?
What aspect in your life that you need to hear the good news that you're worth the risk? One aspect in your life.
What aspect that
No, it's quite a deep question. Take your time to reflect and share. Thank you for taking the risk to share with each other. As a person who is really self-critical and often tends to see my worth based on my performance or what I can do or what I can contribute, I need to hear this good news. For the parts of me that I often contempt or disregard, the good news that I'm worth the risk convicts me to risk more compassion, more curiosity and kindness to these parts of myself, that instead of disproving them or beating them up with criticism. So let's look at how the servants respond to the extravagant gifts from their master. The one with the 5 bags of gold equal 100 years of a worker's salary is qualified as a millionaire in our society today, right? He immediately leaves and does his business with his money. Is there any of you who knows a kind of business that doesn't include any risk? No? No, I don't see a hand. Okay, I don't have my hand up either. We all believe there is no business that is zero risk, right? Whether you do business with stock, you do business with media, with music, with casting, or even church ministry business, all involves risk. We don't know exactly what kind of business this first servant engages with. Is it high risk or low risk business that he did? We don't know. Did he build hotels and resorts in his hometown? We don't know. Did he invest in stocks, buy land, or invest his money in private equity? We don't know. All we know is that he's taking some risk with his money and gaining 5 more bags of gold. And the one with the two talents did the same thing and gained 2 more bags of gold, which can leave him comfortably travel around the world, enjoy his retirement, right? And he also takes some risk in this business with his money. And the one with the 1 bag of gold, which is equal to 20 years of a worker's salary, like I said before, has a different idea than his 2 colleagues. Instead of doing business with his money, he goes out to secretly dig a hole in the ground and hides his money in it. Some of you may think right now, what a foolish strategy. Like, who does that nowadays? But wait, back in the day, at the time, let me remind you of a parable Jesus told his disciples that goes like this. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and in his joy, went to sell all he had to buy that field. You see, burying something in the ground at the time means you consider that thing valuable. It was a common practice to keep some safe. See, you learn something new, maybe you could try it. If you keep your valuables in the house, you're still at risk of being robbed, being thieved, or being lost of that treasure because of fire happening in your house. If you keep it safe in the ground, you may save it for the long term. And this servant is not foolish. He values his master's gift for him, that he's determined to keep this bag of gold safe for his master. He values his master's gift as a treasure because overall it is half a lifetime of his salary, 20 years. It is better to be safe than to be sorry. Have you heard that strategy before? Right? Maybe he thought to himself, I already have less than my colleagues. I better make sure I don't lose any of them. Or he probably thought, I'm already not as gifted as my colleagues, so I better play safe instead of risking and losing it. Then that would be a disaster because my master may think that I'm irresponsible, doesn't know how to manage the money. I would be embarrassed or lose face in front of my colleagues. So I would rather to keep my money safe than to risk and lose it. And maybe because of my strategy, my master will see that I'm a trustworthy servant. It's better to be safe than to be sorry. I don't know about you, but his safety first policy resonates with me as an Asian female. I was brought up to play safe, to not explore new things so that I would not hurt myself or fall on my face. I don't know, why my mom had that risk-taking moment about motorcycle with me, but usually that's not the case. When I was in high school, I really loved basketball. So I signed up for a basketball class after school, and I stayed, I stayed back after classes to play basketball with my friends. And one day, the ball fell on my glasses. I was wearing glasses at the time. And the glasses fell on the ground and immediately broke in half. My mom came and picked me up later. And I just said, oh, I'm so sorry, Mom. My glasses are broken because the ball fell on my face. And my mom just looked at me and said, no more basketball. That was the end of my endeavor to risk and try something new. So maybe this servant was brought up in an Asian family like me, so his default was safety first, especially with something so valuable like this generous gift from his master. Or maybe he had a record of trying to risk with his money before and failed miserably. So that failure or that trauma informs his safety first policy today. The master was so generous with his gifts at the beginning of the story. He already knows his servant's ability. So my question when I read this parable is, why is this master so upset that his third servant brings back the original gifts without losing any? He receives back all of the money that he gave his servant. Is it really because the servant did not make any profit or interest out of the money he received like the other two servants? That's why he was upset? Is it because he was not productive with his gift? That's why his master upset? Is it really because the master thinks that his servant is lazy for doing nothing with his gift except hiding to protect it? Should he be grateful that the master values his gift so much and keeps it safe in the ground? Should he be grateful that he did not lose any money? Why does the master get so upset at this servant who didn't spend any money on himself and did his best to keep it safe? You see, I have a lot of questions reading this parable. I don't know about you. I'm wrestling with this parable. So we know the other two servants, one with 5 talents, or one with 5 bags of gold, and one with 2 bags of gold, are commended for being good and faithful, or reliable. After they presented to the master their respectively 10 bags of gold and 4 bags of gold, they doubled the amount of money they received. Did the master consider these 2 servants faithful and good because they made profits out of the gifts they received? You see, if all this master cares about is productivity, profit, or the bottom line, to me it doesn't match up with the generosity that we see the master demonstrates at the beginning of this parable. A bottom line master does not like to share wealth with others. A bottom line master does not like to write any checks, even when he buys things or receives services from others. He just wants to exploit from others in order to gain more for himself. Some of us may know that kind of leader, that kind of boss, or that kind of system of oppression quite well. So if we say that this master is not a petty tyrant, why is he so upset that at the third servant who is afraid of risking? Or in other words, he has a zero tolerance for risk. Dear brothers and sisters, it is because risk is at the heart of discipleship. The God we worship is the God who takes risk to hover over the chaos and wait for the perfect moment to create this universe and everything in it. God takes risk to form us, human beings, in God's image and breathes God's Spirit into our nostrils and give us life out of dust. God takes risks to give human beings freedom to choose to obey God or to disobey God, to choose good or to choose evil. God takes risks to make a covenant with Noah that he would never destroy the earth again with water. God takes risks to choose an ordinary man that's quite a liar named Abraham and make him a father of all nations called Abraham. God takes risks to make a covenant with Abraham and his offspring, the people of Israel, that God would forever be their God, no matter how they respond to God. God keeps risking, and every time God risks sending God's messengers to speak truth or guide the people of God, the people who imprison or beat or kill God's messengers. And what did God do? God decides to take a greater risk. That God come into the world Godself as a vulnerable baby in the form of Jesus and dwell in the world with us, even though Jesus was not welcome. God risked to live among us, to eat, to drink, to play, and to learn with us. Jesus risked building close friendships with 12 people, and 2 of them betrayed him, and the rest flee from him when he needs help the most. Jesus risked dying the most disgraceful death of his time, crucifixion, and then resurrecting from the dead to redeem us from our debts of sin. Jesus risked sending the Holy Spirit to be present with us as our daily helper, whether we appreciate it or we reject the presence of the Holy Spirit. The God we worship is the God who commits to taking risk with us. And the God we worship is the God who knows us and is still willing to risk everything for us. So following Jesus is saying yes to risk who we are and what we have been given to love God and to love others. Because Jesus is generous, good, and trustworthy. Maybe you ask me, what could I risk? Like, what do I have to risk? Maybe it's your presence, it's your intellect, it's your knowledge, it's your leadership, it's your skill, it's your relationship, it's your finance, it's your education, it's your trust, it's your creativity. To make something good out of what you have been given. You see, the master in this parable is upset at this servant because the servant prioritizes the outcome of the bottom line over risk-taking. He sees money or saving his face is more important than being faithful to his servants. And by doing so, he dehumanizes his master as a heartless oppressor whose main interest is the bottom line. But if you look at the master's suggestion for the servant to give the money to the bankers, we will see that the master, all he wants is not profit, but for the servant to take a risk. Whether small or big, just take a risk. And you know, the banking industry back in the day is not our banking industry. Bankers are individual entrepreneurs. They are money lenders, they are money changers, whose honesty and competence is quite questionable. So if the third servant would take the same, like if the third servant invests his money into the banking industry at the time, he would take the same level of risk as his colleagues, because The bankers are not honest and not trustworthy. And this generous master just wants his servant to trust in his goodness, that they could be free to take risks with their gifts. So for some of us, who are often tempted to attach our self-worth with our achievement or performance, like the way that our Asian culture, even US culture teaches, this is shocking good news. You see, all the kingdom of heaven asks from us is to trust in the generosity of God and take a risk with God. When the third servant chooses to play safe with his gifts, he communicates that his master is not trustworthy and not worth his risk. What would it be like for you and me to acknowledge our fear of risk-taking and still choose to risk failing in order to learn and grow in new ways this year? What would it be like if instead of embracing zero tolerance for risk policy, our churches risk compassion and curiosity to seek for understanding of people that think and look differently than we do? What would it be like if instead of playing safe, we risk vulnerably sharing ourselves and what Jesus means to us with our friends and neighbors? What would it be like if instead of having to protect ourselves, we risk using our voice to speak up and to hold each other accountable, to hold people in power accountable for their actions and their choices? What would it be like if our country takes a risk to welcome refugees and asylum seekers because we believe our neighbors in need are worth the risk? My brothers and sisters, the kingdom of heaven is about risking sharing who we are and what we have been given, to love God and others, even when you feel afraid, even when I feel afraid. Risking here does not mean being reckless or irresponsible. Risking here involves counting the cost of following Jesus and believing that Jesus is worth following, even when we are afraid. Risking in our discipleship to love and to forgive our brothers and sisters, to share our lives with them, our gifts, our perspectives with them, means saying that our brothers and sisters who created in the image of God are worth our risk, even when we feel afraid. The kingdom of heaven is worth our risk, even when you feel afraid. God's imperfect church is worth our risk, even when I and you feel afraid. You see, when I look at numerous stories in the scripture, and also our world today, I think God does not have a successful record in risk-taking. Because every time God keeps risking loving us, numerous times God keeps being rejected or being betrayed. But God continues risking and even promising us that God will be with us until the end of the age. God believes that we are worth God's risk. So the question for us today is, if Jesus is not an oppressor, but a good and generous master, is Jesus worth our risk? What do we choose to do when we are afraid? Let us pray. Jesus, we thank you for your word that reminds us that you see that we are worth the risk. That you risk everything to come and be present with us, to understand us, to be acquainted with our loss and grief, our sadness, and also to celebrate with us, and to give us joy and life in abundance. Jesus, we ask that this year, as we celebrate the Chinese New Year this week and in the weeks to come, that God, you will empower us, God, with your generosity, to dream with you and to take risks with you in ways that we never have been able to before. Jesus, we pray that you destroy our illusions of safety and create new dreams in our hearts, in our lives, in our church. That we may choose to risk more of who we are with our brothers and sisters, even when we feel afraid. We trust you with all of this in the power and precious name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mary. Hopefully that the message can always ponder on the message. We are going to